What's up, everyone? How we doing? I got my coffee here. So good morning. I'll give you a little coffee cheers in the morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in. This is number 5 of our breakfast training talk series, and as you guys know and you're familiar with, this is me sitting down. I got my oatmeal over here, my coffee cooling off, and I sit down. I get a lot of thoughts in the morning, so I like to try and sit down and record something. That way you guys can hear some of my ramblings, and if you guys enjoy them, you can like this page and comment below and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. But I enjoy it, so you're going to deal with it as I continue to make these. Today we're talking about not really a specific topic. Well, it is a topic, it's a single topic, but it has some underlying aspects to it, and that's plyometrics, or stretch shortening cycle. Basically talking about extensive versus intensive plyometrics. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about what that word plyometric means first off, because we think it only means, leg-based stretch shortening cycle movements. So like running and jumping. That's what we think about plyometrics as, but there are upper body ones, and the word plyometric is just used synonymously with something that involves a stretch reflex. So we have a muscle that's tensed and then stretched, and then it has to use that elastic energy to then propel the following movement. An example would be if I am pitching a baseball and I have my arm back here, well, I'm stretching my pec as I throw it. That is actually a plyometric-like action. Or maybe I'm doing a push-up, or I'm like a ballistic push-up, or I'm pressing alignment of an impact. That's kind of like a plyometric action. In the same sense, running and jumping is also a plyometric action. You can think about the muscle. The muscle is going rapidly stretched because it elongates as you change length and bend your knees, or your chest gets pulled back. And then that stretch signals your stretch reflex. So the neuron, the muscle spindle, and it gets stretched, and that impulse goes back and tells the muscle, hey, return back to length. So that's the whole idea of a stretch reflex. So you get a change in length, and once you return back to length, and that return back to length facilitates that contraction of the propulsion. So if I'm landing and my legs get stretched, this is the muscle fiber, and we land and it gets stretched, and it sends a signal, hey, we're being stretched or about to be stretched, don't let me be stretched. And so it tries to contract to not get stretched, and that contraction is what makes the joint not want to bend and too far, so you have a little extra boost, right? That's the stretch reflex. But also there's other things involved too, like the storage of elastic energy in the soft tissues. So we don't just have the muscle fiber, we also have things like the tendon and the muscle sheath, and these proteins that are in between in the muscle, like titin, and these other soft tissues resist the actual stretch. And like a rubber band's an easy example, develops some stored elastic energy. So we have the muscle trying to return back to length. You have these stretched tissues also being, hey, let's go back to length. And so if you do that quick enough, and the stretch is quick enough, and you have a rapid transition into the contraction, you can almost like a slingshot action. You use the stored elastic energy to help the next movement being that contraction. So you get an extra boost, essentially. And so when we think about that, there's different kinds and levels of, not contractions, but stretches. All right, we need to think about that. Those plyometric actions, much more than just, oh, you had a stretch and then you jumped. It's like, how fast was the stretch? How intense was the stretch? How intense was the following jump? Or movement? Did you get a stretch and try and jump really high? Did you hit the ground and get a stretch and not try and jump really high? So there's a lot of actions involved. An easy way to think about it is you can think about the time it takes to transition, right? That's called like the amortization phase, but just the time it takes to do that stretched movement. If it's faster, it might be a little more demanding. Secondly, another factor is how intense of a stretch is, and that's a really important factor and might be the biggest variable in regards to understanding how intense it is. And then obviously the effort to actually jump or move after that. So those are kind of 3 big factors, with the amount of stretch being maybe the biggest one. So based on that, we can kind of look at plyometrics and go, well, we have some movements that have really big stretches and require lots of force to reverse it, and other ones are not so much. And an easy way to quantify for you nerds out there that want to actually know, like, well, how do you measure how much of a stretch it is? Well, think about the impact velocity as well as the mass of the object. So mass is like, hey, that's my body weight. And the impact velocity, if I jump off of a really high box and I land, That's obviously a higher impact velocity than if I jump off a smaller box and land and jump. So you have a couple factors, your mass and your impact velocity together. That's kind of like the magnitude or the total intensity of the plyometric, essentially. And so we can look at that and go, well, we have some movements that we don't have such a big stretch on, and we can do lots of them, like hopping and skipping, these lighter movements. Then we have some that have a really big stretch, and those are really intense movements, and we can't really do many of those because it's really demanding. And so naturally we start to have a stratification or categorization of intense and not intense. And instead of just calling it not intense, we tell it what it does, and it does extensive, right? We're still getting the stretch. We're still stretching those tissues, but it's just not very intensive. It's more extensive because we can do lots of them. In the same way that we're building muscle strength, you can think about a heavy 1 rep max as being super intense and being really good at training strength, and maybe lighter reps are very much more beneficial than maybe putting on hypertrophy and training the actual tissues. The same goes for like plyometrics. Our intense plyometrics, they still obviously train the tissues, but they also just train the general ability to have a big output. And those extensive plyometrics, those smaller ones, train the tissues to handle those intense loads and develop those soft tissue qualities when, well, we do them in a plyometric quick kind of fashion. And so when we think about training, let's think about how we can mix those in. I think there's a big confusion around this topic. Well, not big, but there is some confusion. And not realizing the main variables involved, like the amount of stretch, the speed at which it's happening, your effort actually during the stretch, are trying to jump high, can really help you understand it a little bit better. And then from there, the intensive or extensive plyometrics makes a lot of sense, and you can think of it in parallel to that of a heavy weightlifting movement, a 1 rep max versus, lighter reps for hypertrophy. And maybe you even program them in a similar way. One being more strength dominant, max intensity near 90%, and some being less than that. Again, just kind of rambling. Off the top of my head, how you would do it and make a parallel between that and regular lifting, it's up to you. So that concludes my thoughts. My food's getting cold. My coffee's getting cold. I talked too long today, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I appreciate y'all listening. As always, take care. If you guys like this, feel free to subscribe, give it a thumbs up. And next time, get some coffee with me, enjoy it. Maybe you can drink your coffee while I sit here and let mine cool off. And hopefully this helps start your day. Think about training. If you guys have anything you want to share with me, please leave it in the comments. I'm happy to chew on some new ideas. So next morning here, we can have something to talk about. I appreciate y'all. As always, take care.